Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Beaver, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Relations here at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. We're thrilled to welcome you to another edition of Corsair Chats, a virtual event series hosted by our office. This evening, I'm joined by Peter de Silva, class of 1984. Peter has more than 30 years of experience in the financial sector of banking, institutional asset management, and servicing and wealth management. Mr. De Silva's experience also includes retirement, retail and institutional brokerage, trading, healthcare financial services, and corporate services. He is recognized for his ability to drive outsized results by creating a compelling vision, building the strategy, aligning resources, and executing the plan. Peter shows strong executive leadership and possesses board credentials while being a highly engaged servant leader who is committed to developing talent and effective organizations. A devoted husband and father of 2 daughters, Peter's hobbies include cycling, boating, history, travel, fishing, reading, and leadership. Peter, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And if you have for all of our attendees, if you have any questions for the presenter, please drop them in the Q&A box here through the Zoom, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can during tonight's program. At this point, Peter, please, would you like to get us started?
Well, thank you, Michael. It's indeed a great pleasure to be with everybody from UMass Dartmouth this evening. This is my alma mater and a place that I'm extraordinarily proud of, and a place that I'm thrilled was kind enough to ask me to come and speak with you this evening. I grew up in the area, in the Dartmouth, New Bedford area, and I'll tell you a little bit about my story as we go through the evening. But it all started right there. It all started in a wonderful part of the world, a place I still call home, a place I still love dearly, and where all my family resides, except for me, of course, who is a bit of the rebel in the family who moved out of town. And now we've come back after being in many different parts of the country. We live in Chatham, Massachusetts. We have a home down here, but we spend as much time as we can back in Dartmouth with our family. So with that, I thought what I would do this evening, hold on a second, is sort of use this as our discussion outline tonight. We'll talk a little bit about my personal and professional background and how we arrived at this moment in time. We're going to talk about the necessity of taking risks and building relationships, in building a personal brand, and in really building a career. And we'll talk about how I was able to do that over some period of time. We'll talk about our book. I just finished this book in March of this year. It was launched to really strong acclaim. And so we'll talk a little bit about, what was the inspiration for writing a book? It's not an easy thing, as I found out. This book was a labor of love. Quite honestly, it was a willingness on my part to put the time in to try to give back, if you will, through storytelling and experiences, and in the hopes that some will be able to take lessons that they'll be able to apply in their own lives and in their own career. So we'll talk about who the audience is and the key themes in the book. And one of the centerpiece dimensions of the book are what I call the 10 life and leadership principles. So we'll go through a few of those. We won't have time tonight to go through all of them, but we'll go through a few of those, and I'll be happy to take your questions as we go along. And I have been in search for the last 35 or 40 years for what is the finest definition of leadership. I've read hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions of leadership. I've read dozens of, and if not more, of leadership books. But I was always left wanting for a definition that I could call my own. And I think I found it, and I'm going to share that with you this evening. Powering through adversity is something we all do. We all have different forms of adversity. It might be physical adversity, it might be emotional, it might be relationship adversity. I've had a physical issue that I've had to work through in my life. And quite candidly, it colored how I thought about my relationships, how I thought about my career, how I thought about my leadership style. And I'll share all of that with you this evening. And we're glad to take questions throughout. You can pop them in the chat if you'd like, or we'll have time at the end where you can raise your hand, and I'll be happy to take your questions as we go along. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show, as they say, but just sit back and give me about maybe 20-25 minutes to sort of outline this life and leadership journey that I've been on, and then we'll gladly take your questions. And so, from a personal and professional standpoint, as I said earlier, I'm a local guy. I'm a local kid. I was born in New Bedford, grew up in Dartmouth, right down the street on Reed Road from the campus. I went to Dartmouth High, class of 1979. And when it came time to go to college, my parents gave me three choices. They said, you can go to UMass Dartmouth, UMass Dartmouth, or UMass Dartmouth. Oh, and by the way, you have to live at home and you have to work 40 plus hours a week in order to put yourself through school. And for me, that was great. Just the opportunity to go to college was a big deal. Me and my siblings, we were the first generation in our family to go to school. And I know that so many UMass Dartmouth students are first generation. And so that was me at that point in time. I actually started out in as pre-med and biology and chemistry, and boy, did I hate that. And pretty quickly, I changed my focus onto leadership and into management. Been married to my wife, Michelle, for over 30 years. We have two daughters, Christine and Sarah. And by the way, those pictures on the left, that is my graduation photo on the far left from UMass Dartmouth in 1984. I recently gave a lecture at the school, and they were kind enough, I guess, to find this picture and send it to me. So that's me in '84, and this is our family today. That was taken just a few years ago at a wedding in Newport, Rhode Island. So I have two wonderful daughters, Christine and Sarah, who are incredibly accomplished in their own right, and I'm extraordinarily proud of both of them. As Michael noted, I spent 35 years in the financial industry in all facets of it, from banking to trading to financial product and service to wealth management. And that backdrop actually serves as the backdrop for the book. The last 30, 35 years of the industry and how it evolved and how it changed and how the crisis of 2008 really reshaped financial services going forward. Today, I'm on a number of private company boards. I do some not-for-profit board service. I just finished up an 18-month program at Harvard University in their Advanced Leadership Initiative. And I just, as you know, launched my new book, Taking Stock, which has both been a bestseller and it's recently won two very prestigious awards for its content. So that's a little bit about me and how we got to this point today. I talked earlier about this idea that a lifetime of taking risks and building relationships, as I say here. It would have been easy for me coming out of Dartmouth High School, going to UMass Dartmouth, to pretty much stay home. I love my brothers and sisters, and all three of them stayed in the Dartmouth area. Today, they all live in Dartmouth, and they're incredibly successful. One's a police officer, one's a special ed teacher, and one ran his own business. But for me, I felt like I couldn't sort of get what I wanted to get out of life and out of my career necessarily in southeastern Massachusetts. And so I remember the day I went home and said to my parents that I had taken a job in Boston at Fidelity Investments. And you would have think I was moving to North Dakota or something. It was like, you're going to go to Boston? I'm like, yeah, I am. I'm going to try to seek out something really, really, really great. So I went to Boston, and one day my boss walks in my office and he says, "Hey, Peter," he says, "got a great opportunity for you, but it happens to be in Cincinnati." Actually, more truthfully, it was in northern Kentucky, right on the border of Cincinnati. And he said to me, "Your desk is moving there. Are you going with it or not?" And that's the way things were done back then. I mean, it wasn't really a question of whether I was going to go. It was one question of when I was going to go. So it was off to Cincinnati for a couple of years to really learn and to grow. And I'll tell you, it was maybe the greatest experience of my career, in the sense that to get away from headquarters, to move to a regional site where you have more accountability, more authority, more responsibility, really accelerated my growth and development as a leader. When you're out there sort of all alone, sometimes you have to innovate, you have to imagine things, and I found that to be very, very, very useful. And 2 years later, my boss Fred called me up and said, "Hey, I want you to come back to Boston. This is all with Fidelity Investments, and run another part of our company." So I was able to move back to Boston, which we were thrilled with at that juncture. But one day another company came knocking, a company called UMB Financial Corporation in Kansas City. And I remember telling my wife, Michelle, that I had gotten this call, and I knew the ownership of the company a bit. And my wife said, "Over my dead body, am I moving to Kansas City? I mean, that's just not happening." But after some discussion and debate honestly, some disagreement, she said, you know what, we'll do it. It sounds like a great opportunity for your career, our family. The kids were still young. I think they were in sixth grade and third grade at the time. So it was off to Kansas City, where we spent 12 really terrific years. Really, really terrific years. If you haven't been to that city or to the middle part of the country, you really should. And with all the issues we have today as a nation, that we're being torn apart at the seams in some ways, it's really helpful to have had those experiences, to live in Kansas City and St. Louis and Cincinnati, where I really got a sense of sort of how the other half lives. And I wish that others could get that experience as well. It's very powerful. So we spent 12 years in Kansas City building a company called UMB, and it was noted in 2008 we came through the crisis with flying colors, and the Congress actually declared us the strongest bank in America. And actually, Barney Frank at that point had come to Kansas City to give us an award. So it was a really wonderful, wonderful time. But as luck would have it, I got a call to run Scottrade. Some of you might be familiar with Scottrade. That's a great company that I ran for, well, just about a year or two, because we decided to sell that to TD Ameritrade. So it was off to TD Ameritrade after we sold Scottrade to TD Ameritrade. And then after 3 years with TD Ameritrade, we decided to sell that company to Charles Schwab. And we did that just about 3 years ago now. And at that point, Schwab said, we don't need you anymore. You can kind of go away now. And I said, okay, no problem. That's kind of the deal. That's how these things go. No problem at all. And that's when I ended up back in Boston, or actually in Cambridge, at Harvard University in the Advanced Leadership Program. And so I only tell you this because, as I said earlier, it would have been easy to stay put, to not take these risks, to not take these chances, to not to get to know people around the country who have been supportive of me and helpful for me in my business career and in my life. But I have found that taking these risks and building these relationships across the country have been very, very, very beneficial to me. And when young people come to me for advice or counsel or guidance or wisdom, whichever I can afford them, I always tell them, I say, particularly when you're young, take those risks. They have to be calculated and they have to be prudent, and you have to know that you have an escape plan if it doesn't work out. But take those risks. They'll probably pay huge dividends for you down the road. So that was my career. It was running around the country doing lots of different things at different organizations and different positions, and all those things sort of helped me to learn and grow into the leader and the individual that I ultimately became. So hold on one second. There we go. So why write a book? I got to tell you, this was not on my list of things to do. But after 35 years of being around the industry and being in leadership, and being involved with communities and not-for-profit work and such, I just felt like I had assembled a series of principles that I thought might be useful for others. And so I put together my 10 life and leadership principles. And what makes these different than a lot of academic leadership books is these are from real world experiences. This is not like, an academic sitting around thinking about leadership and espousing leadership principles without ever having actually had to implement them, experience them, and suffer the benefits and the consequences of the mistakes along the way. So I was a practitioner, and these are viewed from a practitioner standpoint, and I think that makes them unique in a lot of ways and very helpful. And candidly, I've been extremely gratified with the reception that the book has received. It was certainly a bestseller when it came out for a number of weeks, both on Amazon and on other listings in these categories that you can see here. So it's been extraordinarily gratifying to have that kind of reception to a book that I put together over about an 18-month period of time. And more recently, it's actually been nominated and won a couple of awards already, the Literary Titan Book Award and the Beach Award. The Beach Award's kind of a funny one. I was like, well, I don't see this as a beach read necessarily, but it won the Beach Book Festival in the business category. So this isn't a typical, non-fiction or fiction rather, fiction beach novel. This is a nonfiction business book, but it did win the Beach Book Festival. So I thought that was kind of fun, kind of interesting. So again, the inspiration for writing a book of this nature was this 35 years of accumulated knowledge. I had a lot of different business experiences, not all of them positive. Lots of them were negative. People I worked with that candidly, I always remembered every time I spoke to someone or observed someone, I always took something away. And that something might be something that I want to retain, something that I want to emulate, or candidly, as often it was something that I didn't want to emulate. I used to always say to myself, if I ever get in that situation, I'm not going to do whatever it is the way that I just saw that person do it. But I had all these experiences again, and I wanted to put those down. One of the great things about learning is that once something has been learned, theoretically, it doesn't have to be learned again. It can be shared. And so I thought, boys, if these are real learnings, can I share them and help others accelerate their growth and their potential? There's an old saying in academics in particular and such, which is publish or perish, right? So I'm sitting here at Harvard. Pretty much everybody's written a book or two or three or 10, and I'm kind of amongst some of the greatest minds in the world talking about social impact issues. And I'm like, you know what? I think I have a little bit of time. I think this is a good time for me to put these thoughts together in a cogent way and try to put them down so that I can share them. And so there was a little bit of maybe peer pressure being at Harvard to put this together. I really wanted to share these 10 life and leadership principles, which we'll talk about in a minute. And lastly, I've been fighting my entire life with a disease called Charcot-Marie tooth disease, which you'll learn more about in a second. It has nothing to do with the teeth in your mouth. It is a progressive neurological disorder that is a very debilitating disorder for many people who have it. There are many different varieties of it and different severity levels of it, but we'll talk about that later. But the book really recounts my struggles and my journey with CMT, and candidly how that informed, for good or for bad, my leadership style and some of the things that I became, some of the things that actually helped to form my nature, my character. And so this book is written for all current and aspiring leaders, not young, not old, anyone who aspires to be or is in a leadership capacity today. I think the lessons here are very transferable to anyone who aspires or is in a leadership capacity today. Anyone who working through adversity, and I think this is everybody, right? Don't we all have adversity of one kind or another to work through? So this book hopefully helps individuals think about how to work through adversity, how to use your adversity as a strength as you go forward. There's a lot in this book about the last 35 years of the financial industry, including a section on the 2008 financial crisis, which I lived. I can still remember the days where, honest to goodness, I thought the world was coming apart at the seams. And that's not an exaggeration. I remember when one of my traders walked into my office and said, "Hey, there's nobody to do business with today. No counterparty wants to do business with us." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? We're the strongest bank in America, literally." And they said, "That's not about us. It's about the securities that we're pledging as collateral. And normally, if you pledge $1 of collateral, you can borrow $1 against that. Well, in this environment, you had to pledge $1.02 or $1.03 of collateral in order to borrow $1. So it was really a very, very, very scary time. And I sort of recount some of that in the book. And while I'm not an academic, I was told by my friends at Harvard that academics are very interested in this book, and particularly those that study the art of leadership, and leadership is an art form, as well as the science of leadership. So that's kind of how we thought about the book as we wrote it. Now there are a couple of key themes in here that I want to talk about. The first is this idea of your personal mosaic. And so this just came to me over the course of my life, this idea that your life is really a mosaic, a stained glass window, if you will, that from time to time you have to step back and look at in refrain and really just stare at it and say, yeah, those experiences, those decisions I've made, those people that have touched me, those relationships that I have are part of my mosaic. And every single day, and every time I meet someone, they add to my mosaic, and my mosaic gets stronger and stronger and more, I'll say pretty, but more relatable, if you will, over time. So I have this fundamental belief that each of us has our own personal and professional mosaic. And we build on it each and every day with the people we touch and the experiences that we have. And by the way, the beautiful thing about a mosaic or a stained glass window is that it's never complete until the final piece is put in. And when is the final piece put in? Effectively at your last breath, right? That's literally the mosaic of your life is not complete until your last breath is drawn. And then it is there to be shared with others, with those that loved you, with those that cared for you, for those that were your family and friends. That's your gift to them. That's your life, if you will, in this mosaic. And so this idea of building a mosaic is a thread that kind of runs through this book called Taking Stock. Using vulnerability as a leadership strength. Look, when I was a young leader, let's be clear, you showed no vulnerability. You only showed strength. That was the way it was. Anybody that showed vulnerability, was weak and couldn't really become a leader because leaders had to be strong. Well, over time, I came to understand that, in fact, vulnerability can be a leadership strength. People want to work for and with people who are authentic. They want to work for and with people who are honest, people that they understand, people who they can relate to, and they can't relate to you if they don't understand the totality of who you are and the totality of your experiences, both good and bad. So over time, this took me a long time. This took me probably 30 years to figure out that vulnerability could actually be a strength and not a weakness. And I think in today's world, more enlightened leaders at least understand this and really understand that showing a bit of vulnerability as appropriate is indeed a strength and makes you a more genuine, authentic leader. And I think people really want to see that in their leaders today. When I was in Kansas City in particular for those 12 years, I was a very significant community leader. When you run a big bank in a community of 2.5 million people, candidly, you do a lot of giving back. And I spent a lot of time giving back to the community. And it became more and more apparent to me that, there are all these wonderful social groups, social impact groups working really hard to make a difference in their communities. But at the end of the day, what I came to understand and appreciate is that business, more than any other entity, has the power to drive positive social change. And if you think about over 100 million people work in businesses around the country, 100 million people, that's a lot of people. And so if businesses really can be the breeding ground for positive social change, I think that is a so much better solution than what happens in communities spontaneously. And so that was something I came to understand, and I talk about that a little bit in the book. Another theme is adversity. In my case, it was Charcot-Marie tooth disease. It was hiding behind that. It was not talking about that for many years. It was showing strength as opposed to weakness. But I used that adversity as a strength. I probably outworked everybody that I was around because I felt like I needed to, because somehow I had some limitation that maybe they didn't. What I didn't understand is that each of us has our issues. Each of us has our adversity that we're dealing with. Mine just happened to be visible in the name of CMT. And then, of course, I've always wanted to share my 10 life and leadership lessons. And so that's a key theme throughout the book. The whole center of the book is kind of a tear out section where you can take the 10 leadership lessons and really study them. There's a companion guide that goes along. I call it the leadership readiness questionnaire, where you can actually look at these 10 life and leadership lessons, ask yourself these questions about each of these to see how ready you are to actually utilize these life and leadership lessons in your own leadership practice. So those are some of the themes that we talk about in the book. So here are the 10 life and leadership principles. And again, I don't have time tonight to go through each of them, but I'll go through a couple just to talk through them for a second. Let's start with the first one: create and communicate a compelling vision and purpose. This is the role of a leader. This is the role of a CEO. This is the role of someone in a position of authority, to really communicate a compelling vision and purpose and enroll people in that. Joel Barker has a great saying, which is that vision without action is just a dream. and that action without vision is just wasting time, but that vision with action can change the world. And I fundamentally believe that. And so the primary job of a leader is to create a compelling vision and purpose. And I think this word purpose today is really, really important. You know, I would not have used the word purpose 10 years ago, but more and more, the more current generations are seeking purpose in their work. They're not just seeking a place to work, they're seeking a place with a purpose in this world. And so it's extraordinarily important that leaders think about not just creating and communicating this, but that there's a sense of purpose, a sense of why do we exist? And, you know, if we went away, would anybody care? Would anybody miss us? And so you have to be able to answer that question as a leader. And the answer should be, yeah, if we went away, the world would be worse off, or our business would be worse off, or our industry would be worse off. You have to be able to answer that question for your associates. And if you can't, you know, I think you need to go back and really reconsider what it is you're trying to achieve. The second principle is really important in a business context, in the sense that, you know, I remember when I was a young leader, and I went to my boss, Fred, and I said, Fred, I've got this great idea. I want to reorganize my team, and here's how I want my team to be focused, and here are the people that I have, etc. And he just stopped me and he said, to what end? I said, what do you mean? This is a great plan. And he said, to what end? And I said, I don't know what you mean, Fred. He said, well, you're starting backwards. You're starting with the structure. You're starting with people that you have, not necessarily people you need, but people you have, and you're just moving the deck chairs around. He said, but until you have a clear and cogent strategy, until you have that, please don't monkey around with the organization. Start with the strategy. Then and only then, that'll inform the structural alternatives that you can consider. And then and only then, once you have the structural alternatives put in front of you, can you think about what people, what skills, what knowledge, what competencies you need in order to execute against that. And he knocked me down, I mean, literally knocked me down to that meeting. And I fundamentally remember that today. I absolutely remember that meeting today. And from then on, when I talk about this, I talk about it with great passion, because if you start backwards, you end up compromising. You end up basically saying, well, I'll make do with what I have versus what I need. So make sure when you think about your organization that it could be a family, it could be a business, it could be a not-for-profit, that you are crystal clear on what it is you want to accomplish. And then and only then can you consider what structural alternatives you want to have, and then only then can you figure out whether you have the right people or not. At least I have found that to be very, very, very helpful to me over time. Let me tell you a little story to really get at this next one, this take intelligent risks on emerging leaders. You know, it is a fundamental accountability of leaders to develop the next generation of talent. I mean, there's nothing more critical in my view than that. I think of Howard Schultz, who's the CEO of Starbucks. Do you know how many times he has run Starbucks? 3 times. 3 times. He ran it, he left, he put somebody in charge, he wasn't happy. He ran it, he left, he put somebody in charge, he wasn't happy. He ran it, he left, put somebody in charge. 3 times. I think that's a failure of leadership. I think that's a failure of succession planning. I think there's a whole bunch of failures in that. Howard's a great guy. I'm sure he's a very effective CEO, but that's not the point. He didn't prepare the organization by taking risks on young emerging leaders and putting them in positions of authority. So here's a young guy, myself, at Fidelity Investments. And I mentioned earlier that I was sent to Cincinnati. What I didn't tell you was we had sort of a mess out there that needed to be cleaned up. And so Fred sent me out there. It was great. And something really weird started to happen, in the sense that Fred would come out every week. He wouldn't talk to me. He'd go in his office, he'd put up his feet, he'd read the Wall Street Journal and make a few phone calls, then get on a plane and go back home. And this went on for almost 2 years. I was happy to have him. He and I got along terrifically well, but I wasn't quite sure what that was all about. And so 2 years later, my job was done. I was invited to go back to Boston. I got a promotion, all that good stuff. And one night I'm at a party, and Fred's boss, Mark, is there. And Mark says, geez, Peter, you know, we're so pleased with what you did and really did a nice job, etc. And he said, but to think, nobody else in the executive committee thought you were capable of that position. And I said, what are you talking about? And he very quickly changed the subject. So the next morning I walked into Fred's office and I said, look, you got to level with me. What the heck happened when you sent me out to Cincinnati? And he said, what are you talking about? I said, oh, I had this thing with Mark and it was really awkward and such. And he said, oh, don't worry about that. I said, what do you mean don't worry about it? It was really awkward to me. And he looked at me and he said, hey, everything worked out okay, right? I said, yeah, everything worked out terrifically well. And I stopped him mid-sentence and I said, now I understand. You came out every week, not because you thought I needed help, although you were there if I did. You were there to show the executive committee that you were there in the event that something went wrong. And he looked at me and he kind of looked at his shoes and he said, yeah, so, it all worked out. Like, yeah. So the point in telling you that story is how important it is to take risks on young and emerging leaders, and also do what I characterize as building fences around them. I don't mean building fences in the sense of trying to contain them, but building fences so that they understand the boundaries that they can go. That's what Fred was doing with me. Here are the boundaries. And if you're going to step out of those boundaries, let's talk about why you're going to step out of those boundaries and what your plan is. And so it was a really important lesson for me very early in my career. And I would hope that if you talk to anyone who's worked with me over the years, I would hope they would say Peter's one of the best development leaders I've ever had, because I fundamentally believe that you have to take risks on young people. You have to protect them. I have a saying that near failure is better than actual failure. Near failure can actually encompass all of the learnings you get with actual failure without all the emotional baggage that can go along with failing. So I try to let my folks walk up to that line and then pull them back. And we have a moment of leadership moment if we have to pull them back. So anyways, I went a little too long on that one, but I think it's something for you to think about. Taking care of your associates, I have a saying that if you take care of associates, they'll take care of the clients and the rest will take care of itself. It's really simple, right? It's probably the core essence of my leadership style. It's that simple. Take care of the associates, they take care of clients, and the rest takes care of itself. Well, one point I wanted to prove that empirically. I wanted to prove empirically with data that my thesis was correct. And so when I was at UMB for about 7 or 8 years, the only slide I cared about in the annual report every year was the one that tracked associate engagement and the correlation to client engagement and the correlation to our results, our financial results as a company. And guess what? They were extraordinarily tightly correlated. Every time we saw an increase in associate engagement, we saw an increase in client engagement, we saw an increase in our results. So anybody who says, associates are at the back end of the discussion, they're just absolutely wrong. They have to be at the front end of your thinking, the front end of how you build your organization and how you take care of the people who take care of your clients. It's extraordinarily important. And maybe the last one I'll touch on this evening is leading by principles and not by rules. Now, let me contrast two historical artifacts. One would be the Code of Hammurabi, which had 282 rules in it. And the rules were very, very, very prescriptive. If you do this, you will be stoned to death. If you do this, you will be killed, whatever it might be. It was very prescriptive, right? Well, that's a relic of history. Nobody follows the Code of Hammurabi anymore. But contrast that, for example, with the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which talks about all men being created equal. And it doesn't then enumerate, 10,000 lines of what that means. It means what it says, and it says what it means. That's a principle, right? And so as a leader, I have always tried to operate with a set of principles. One of the first things we do when I adopt a new team is we sit down and we talk about what our principles are going to be. How are we going to function? How are we going to operate? Not a bunch of rules. I won't allow that. But we set the principles in motion, and then behavior is modeled around the principles. And I've found that to be a very, 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 very effective way to lead. I have an old saying too that you want to do what's right in life, not what's popular. And I think if you lead by principles, that protects you in that regard. That you'll always do what's right, not necessarily what's popular at the moment. So there's lots more about these life and leadership principles in the book. There's many experiences that I relay about these life and leadership principles and how they came to be. And I encourage you, if you're interested, to spend some time with the book. And again, there's a lot more information in there about this. Now, my leadership style wasn't a revolution, it was an evolution. I made lots of mistakes along the way, and I learned from those mistakes. And they're either on my mosaic or they're not on my mosaic based upon the mistakes that I might have made. So I made some mistakes. For example, I had to learn, like all leaders do, to stop doing the work and start leading others in doing the work. I had to learn about recognition, that early in your career you want to be the one that's sort of being recognized. You want to be the one that the boss says, hey, you did a great job today. What I came to understand over time is that if you shine the light on others, the reflection shines even more brightly back on you. And so you have to get yourself out of that idea that you are what this is all about. You're not. Your job is to humbly lead others, not necessarily, be egotistical about it. So shining the light on others will in fact allow that to reflect more brightly on you. But those are things you learn over time. And so my whole life and leadership principles, the evolution of these, were definitely took me some time, and candidly, I'm still learning even today. So I said earlier that I was always seeking, what is the finest definition of leadership, at least that made sense to me. And so, this is a biblical reference, so I don't want to be offensive to anyone. I don't mean this in a religious context, but this passage, the first letter of Paul, was read at my wedding, and it may have been read at yours. It's read at many Christian weddings. And I remember this like it was yesterday. And then one day, I don't know, maybe 10 years or so ago, I was thinking about leadership, and this came back into my mind, this idea that, is there something here in this first letter of Paul that might have some leadership dimensions to it? So you can read it. You've probably already read it while I've been talking. And I got to thinking, can love be leadership, and can leadership be love? And I sort of dismissed it at first and said, no, it can't. But then I really couldn't move away from this. I kept thinking there was some nugget of wisdom here that I needed to better understand. So I don't know exactly why this happened, but one day I said, what if you substitute the word leadership for the word love and for the word it in the previous version? And so I've done that here, and I talk about this at great length in the book. And again, I'm not going to read this out loud. You can read it, but I think from my perspective, and only my perspective, this works for me, because I fundamentally believe that leadership takes a degree of patience, right? It takes a degree of kindness. Think about the leader that's arrogant or boastful or envious or rude. Do you want to work for that person? Probably not. Leaders do not necessarily insist on their own way. What they insist on is they insist on making sure they have facts, that they have data, and that they're willing to change their mind if the facts and data suggest that they should. Leadership can't be irritable or resentful. I don't want to work for those kinds of people. And it can't rejoice in wrongdoing, but it has to rejoice in the truth. Again, that goes back to data and how data is used to get to the truth. And lastly, leadership never ends. You can't turn it off. You can't say, okay, it's 5 o'clock, shut the light off in your office, go home, and you're no longer a leader. That's just not the case. I was a leader in my community. I was a leader in my family. I was a leader in my business, and you are too. And so this idea that leadership is eternal, that leadership never ends, I think is extraordinarily important. So you may or may not like this definition, and that's perfectly fine. I'm not here to sell you on it, but I am here to have you consider it, because for me at least, it meets my standard that I was looking for a definition that I would aspire. And I clearly don't do this as well as I'd like, but I aspire to be this kind of leader. And I would hope that over time I've gotten closer and closer to this. Although again, I'm nowhere near where I'd like to be. So I offer that for your consideration this evening as you think about your own leadership style and your own competency around leadership. So I want to spend just a minute. I talked a little bit about adversity, and I want to educate you a little bit about this disease that I have and how difficult it's been, and how it shaped me and formed me as a leader, and candidly as a person. I was very quiet about this. My parents told me when I was a kid, when I was diagnosed with this, by the way, my sister has this and other family members have it as well, that this was my problem. This was to be nobody else's problem. the best answer was to be private about it, not to talk about it, and just go on with life. And that was pretty good advice, I thought, and I used that advice throughout most of my life. But as I said earlier, I think leaders need to be authentic. They need to be genuine. They need to be truthful. They need to be vulnerable at times. And over time, I began to understand the power of authenticity, the power of genuineness, and the power of vulnerability. So what is CMT? CMT is a pretty common disease, believe it or not. It affects roughly 1 in 2,500 people. About 150,000 people in the United States have this disease. It is a peripheral neuropathy, right? So it's a disease. It's a wasting disease, if you will, where the nerves don't work well in the extremities, and the nerves are what help the muscles to grow and maintain size and mass. And so when the nerves begin to die away, all of a sudden you have wasting in your limbs and such. And I've got a moderate case of this. There are people in wheelchairs. My sister's in a wheelchair. Thank God I'm not. I have a moderate case of this particular disorder. It's generally not life-shortening. However, I would challenge that, because let's just say one of the symptoms of CMT is balance issues, and you fall down all the time and such. And as a kid, I fell down all the time. But let's say you're at the top of the stairs and you fall down the stairs and you die, right? Well, the report's going to say that you had, I don't know, blunt head trauma or something like that. And that may have been what killed you, but what the cause was the fact that you had this instability because you had CMT. That's not going to be on the death certificate, but truthfully, that is what caused the issue. And so it's not in and of itself life-shortening. It does compromise lifestyle and quality of life, but it is not generally life-shortening. Although, again, I could argue otherwise. Hold on a second. So here are some of the common symptoms I already mentioned. Hands and muscles are shrinking. My hand muscles are shrinking. My leg muscles are shrinking. I have no weak grip. I can't find shoes that fit. I have really high arches. I trip a lot. My legs are skinny. My ankles always twist and give out. It's hard to lift my legs and my feet, et cetera, et cetera. So it can be very debilitating. And there are no treatments and no cures for this disease, none whatsoever. And I remember 50 years ago when I was diagnosed, my doctor saying, hey, don't worry, modern science, modern medicine, we're going to have a cure for this thing in the next 10 to 20 years. Well, here we are literally 50 years later, and we've had one human trial with drug which was not successful. We are optimistic we're getting closer to a treatment, but at this juncture, there are no effective treatments or cures for the disease. Okay, so this is what it looks like. It's still called, there's 3 different types. It can be demyelinating CMT, axonal CMT, intermediate CMT. There's all kinds of different manifestations. Again, I would say I have a moderate case. My dad had this. He really struggled with it. By the end of his life, in his early 60s, he couldn't dress himself and had some real physical challenges. But he, like me, you just work through it. You just power through it and do the best that you can. You may know this guy, Alan Jackson, the great country music singer. Hopefully you know Alan Jackson. He recently came out and said that he had CMT. It was really interesting. He was on the Today Show with Jenna Bush Hager, and basically said, I gotta tell you something. He said, I really need to share this, because when I'm on stage, I'm falling, I'm tripping, I'm having difficulty standing still, and people think I'm drunk, or they think I'm on drugs. He says, neither is true. I've got this thing called CMT, and he talks about it, and was very generous to an organization that I'm part of, the CMT Research Foundation, in that he recently went on tour and gave us $1 for every ticket that he sold. And we raised over $250,000 thanks to his generosity. And we also had another donor who matched his $250,000, which was really, really neat. So we raised almost $500,000 to fund research into CMT, thanks to Alan Jackson and his willingness to come out and talk about his struggle with CMT. So we're going to stop there. I hope this has been interesting. I hope it's been, somewhat helpful to you. But I am an open book, and I'd love to take your questions at this time.
And if you've got any questions, feel free to type them into that Q&A box, or we can try using the raise hand feature. I think I can allow people to speak that way. So we'll give it a second here and see if anybody has any questions.
Hi, good evening. Hi, this is Hitesh Kumar. I'm from the batch 2015. Did my MBA from UMass Dartmouth. So my question to you is, I'm a new IT manager, and I just wanted to kind of get your feedback on how did you deal with the situations or the circumstances when you become the manager or a leader for the first time. Did you change? Did you bring in any change to your behavior with the folks which were your colleagues before? And did you face any challenges, like a colleague who was your a person who was your colleague before, now you are his or her manager? Did you face any of the challenges in your career before? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Ish. It's one of the most challenging things for young leaders in particular, is that moment where you go from being a peer to being someone's boss, if you will. And yes, I had that happen quite a few times in my career. I would say this to you. I would say first and foremost, it's as uncomfortable for them as it is for you. So keep that in mind. Remember that they're sitting there saying, "Oh, geez, we used to be peers, and now he's my boss," and it's as uncomfortable for you saying, "Boy, now I need to manage this person," where before we were at the same level. And so my counsel would be to let them have this conversation with them and let them express how they're feeling to you. Make sure that you give them an opportunity to express how they're feeling. Don't assume you know how they're feeling, right? That's always a bad thing to do. So just sit down with them and say, "Look, this is a bit uncomfortable for you. It might be a bit uncomfortable for me. I sure could use your support. I need your help." But maybe what's most important is let them do their job, right? Even though you're their manager, let them do their job. They've done it well, presumably, and let them do it. Now, there may be over a period of time, where you come to realize that, back to my strategy, structure, people thing, you may say, "Look, we're going to go in a slightly different direction. I'm going to set this organization up under my leadership to do something fundamentally different, or have different goals, or have different objectives, or a different vision or strategy," whatever it might be. At that juncture, it is very fair for you to assess talent. After you have your strategy, then you can say, what's the right structure to accomplish the strategy? And then you can map the people to that. And it's possible you might say, "I don't have the right people. These people were great in getting us to where we are, but they may not be the right ones to lead me or take me to where I want to go." And I'll tell you just a very brief story. When I took over the teams at TD Ameritrade, after we sold Scottrade to Ameritrade, I had this real dilemma, because I was getting a lot of feedback that I didn't have the right people, and I'm like, I sort of did what my boss did to me many years ago. I said, "To what end? Let's make sure we have the strategy right first. So let's sit back and make sure we understand what we're going to do, and then we can figure out exactly what the structure is going to be, and what people I need." I ended up letting three of them go. 3 of the 7, I think, that I inherited, I let them go. But I did it in the context of, "Hey, you were awesome. You were great in getting us to where we were under different leadership with a different set of direction. I'm resetting the direction, the strategy. I've rethought the structure, and now your skill set doesn't map to that structure." So it wasn't easy to do, but I think they understood that it was a very reasoned argument, or a very reasoned way that we went about making those changes. But I had to let 3 of them go. It wasn't easy, but it was something we needed to do.
Great. Our next question is from Mara. What are your thoughts on leadership and remote work?
Yeah, it's a real contemporary question, isn't it? I talk a little bit about this in the book, because it was so germane to that time that I was writing the book. Look, remote work's here to stay, period. Now, I fundamentally believe that people need an attachment to something. They need an attachment to an organization. They need an attachment to other people. et cetera. They need attachment to a strategy, to a vision. And I'll tell you a little story. So when I was running Ameritrade, we were growing like a weed, absolutely growing like a weed. It was nuts. We needed to hire 2,000 or 3,000 people during the pandemic. Think about this, during the pandemic. And so my team said, yeah, we're going to recruit virtually. We're going to train virtually. We're going to license virtually. We're going to indoctrinate them into our culture virtually. And I'm like, oh, okay, we don't have a choice anyway. So let's figure out how to do that. And I thought we did a heck of a good job doing it. But about 6 months later, what we began to see was a lot of attrition, attrition that was over-indexing on those people that we hired during the pandemic, who had never been in our offices, who had never met their manager face-to-face, who had never had lunch with their colleagues, who had never really experienced our values in action, if you will, had never sat next to a colleague, etc. And so I asked our HR team, I said, can you please tell me, like, what's going on here? I thought we did a good job onboarding these folks and indoctrinating them into our company. And what we heard was what I just said. I have no connection to this company. It's a transaction. I don't have any connection to my boss. I don't have any connection to the company. And so it really struck me at that moment that while remote work is here to stay, and I believe what I said, and I said what I believe, I think you have to make sure that is blended, if you will, with time to build relationships, personal relationships, time for people to come in and feel the culture in a real sort of way, in an office setting. I'm not here to say that's 1 day a week, that's 5 days a week, that's 3 days a week. That's for individual companies to figure out. And sometimes, as you know, that can be role dependent. Right? We've had lots of offshoring over the last 25 years where people never come to the home office, so to speak. So I think it can be done, but you have to be very sensitive to the idea that these are human beings, and all good things in life start and end with people, and they need connection, and they need to feel a connection to something bigger than themselves. So you have to figure out how you can do that in the context of remote work, or you have to augment that with some other ways so that they feel a real connection to the cause.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Jan. Can you discuss if you need to possess all 10 of the leadership principles and be really proficient in each?
Yeah, good question. I've not gotten this question before, but I think it's a really insightful one. The answer is no. I don't think you need all 10. I think that they are situational in nature. Each of these can be, used in different ways in different situations. I encourage you to get the companion leadership guide that goes along with this book. If you buy the book, you can get the guide because that sort of talks about the importance of each of these, but also the kinds of readiness questions you can ask yourself. But no, I don't think you need all of them, but I do think there are a few that are absolutely essential, like this idea that if you can't create a compelling vision and purpose for your team, it's going to be really hard to lead. Really, really, really hard to lead. If you don't, develop the next generation, your company's at risk of not surviving. That doesn't mean you have to do that the first day, but you're going to have to do that over time. If you can't focus and finish, you'll destroy your company or your organization. At the end of the day, it takes focus and it takes finishing, right? There's lots of people who don't focus. They got 62 things going on when really 4 things done extraordinarily well will get you much further than 62 things done not so well, if you will. So I don't think you need all 10, but I think what you'll find is over the course of your career, you will use all 10 in one way or another. But you don't have to read the book and then practice all 10 day one. They're a bit situational. And I think that over time, you'll end up using all 10 regardless.
All right. And I think this is our last question here from Annabelle. What are your thoughts on coaching or mentoring potential young associates who are interested in leadership?
I think it's absolutely one of the most important roles of a leader is to spend time with that young person and help that young person grow and develop. And that's done by giving them a variety of experiences. When Fred sent me to Cincinnati, I did not want to go. Let me be clear about that. But I grew faster than I ever would have grown sitting in that same role in that same job in my Boston office. So challenge people to get out and grow, protect them. As I said, I think it's important to protect young people. I think people say, oh, failure is a great teacher. If you're an entrepreneur, there's some truth in that. But if you're inside a large company, they say, oh, we accept failure. No, they don't. No, they really don't, by and large. They don't really want failure. They don't mind this concept of near failure. Walk up to the line and then come back. I think that's all good. So I think it's your obligation, it's your responsibility to sit with that person, understand what their goals and aspirations are, and ensure that you're their coach, you're their mentor to help them achieve their dreams. And I'll tell you, the best thing that ever happened to me was having mentors, both. So be one and get one. And by the way, it's probably best if your mentor is not the person who's your boss. It's fine to have a boss you get along with and learn from. That's all good. But a mentor is somebody you can be honest with, you can be transparent with, you can be truthful with. That's probably not your boss. And they can be inside the company or outside the company. But I encourage you to find mentors. They're very useful. They will accelerate your learning and they will help you grow.
Great. Seeing no other questions, I think that should wrap things up. So thank you, Peter, for your incredible presentation this evening. We've so appreciated your expertise here.
Yep. And if you want to buy the book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much anywhere you can buy. You can click one of these things, or you can buy the book for sure. You can visit me on my website too. Very simple, peterjdesilva.com. You'll be able to buy the book there, but also you'll get lots of other tidbits. You can see all the podcasts that I've done and interviews that I've done, and so please feel free to keep in touch with me as we go forward.
Great. And audience, thank you again for joining us. We have some exciting virtual and in-person events coming up, including some more Corsair chats on artificial intelligence, one of our alumnus's time in the CIA, and more, as well as we have a service event at the South Dartmouth YMCA on September the 10th. Information can be found on our website at umassd.edu/alumni. We hope that you'll also follow us on social media to stay connected to exciting news and events. So that's at UMassD_alumni on Twitter, at UMassD alumni on Instagram, and UMass Dartmouth alumni on Facebook. So thank you all once again and have a wonderful evening.